So for all our powers of reasons and us talking about moderate and peaceful Muslims, I'm glad you're here. But where are the others speaking out?
This panel was convened about Benghazi, 4 Americans dead, and a government still not answering for it. Then a law student takes the microphone and changes the subject to Islam. Brigitte Gabriel does not flinch. She answers with numbers, then with history. Nazi Germany, Russia, China, Japan. Then she turns the question around and asks where everyone else is. The whole room detonates in applause. This is what happens when someone refuses to hand over the floor. Let's get into it.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace to you all. My name is Saba Ahmed. I'm a law student at American University. I am here to ask you a simple question. I know that we portray Islam and all Muslims as bad, but there's 1.8 billion Muslim followers of Islam. We have 8 million plus Muslim Americans in this country, and I don't see them represented here. But my question is, how can we fight an ideological war with weapons? How can we ever end this war? The jihadist ideology that you talk about, it's an ideology. How can you ever win this thing if you don't address it ideologically?
Listen to what just happened. The subject of this panel was Benghazi. 4 Americans are dead, and the questioner opens with a population count. 1.8 billion followers, over 8 million Muslim Americans, and nobody on this panel represents them. None of that answers how our government failed in Libya. It is a change of subject dressed up as a grievance. Brigitte Gabriel is about to refuse that frame entirely.
Great question. I am so glad you're here, and I am so glad you brought that up because it gives us an opportunity to answer. What I find so amazing is since the beginning of this panel, which we are here about Benghazi attack against our people, not one person mentioned Muslims. We are here against Islam, or we're launching war against Muslims. We are here to discuss how 4 Americans died and what our government is doing. We were not here to bash Muslims. You were the one who brought up the issue about most Muslims, not us. And since you brought it up, allow me to elaborate with my answer.
That is the cleanest possible answer. This was a Benghazi panel. 4 Americans died in Libya, and the subject was what Washington did about it. Nobody on that stage said the word Muslim first. Brigitte Gabriel says it plainly. You brought it up, not us. No apology, no scramble to prove she is not a bigot. She just takes the premise and hands it back. Then comes the dangerous part. Allow me to elaborate.
There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Of course, not all of them are radicals. The majority of them are peaceful people. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25%, according to all intelligence services around the world. That leaves 75% of them peaceful people. But when you look at 15 to 25% of the world Muslim population, you're looking at 180 million to 300 million people dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. That is as big of the United States. So why should we worry about the radicals, 15 to 25%? Because it is the radicals that kill. Because it is the radicals that behead and massacre. When you look throughout history, when you look at all the lessons of history, most Germans were peaceful. Yet the Nazis drove the agenda. And as a result, 60 million people died, almost 14 million in concentration camps, 6 million were Jews.
Here is the number that changes the argument. 15 to 25% radicalized. Against 1.2 billion, that is 180 to 300 million people. Larger than the population of the United States. And then the history lesson lands. Most Germans in the 1930s were peaceful people. The Nazis drove the agenda anyway, and 60 million people died. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. That is not an insult to anyone. It is a statement about who sets direction.
When you look at Russia, most Russians were peaceful as well. Yet the Russians were able to kill 20 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at China, for example, most Chinese were peaceful as well. Yet the Chinese were able to kill 70 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Japan prior to World War II, most Japanese were peaceful as well. Yet Japan was able to butcher its way across Southeast Asia, killing 12 million people, mostly killed with bayonets and shovels.
She runs the same test on 3 more countries. Most Russians were peaceful, and 20 million died anyway. Most Chinese were peaceful, and 70 million died anyway. Most Japanese were peaceful, and 12 million were butchered across Southeast Asia. This is the part the questioner has no reply to. The argument was never that a majority is guilty. The argument is that a majority which stays quiet does not decide anything. Watch her bring that structure home to 9/11.
On September 11th in the United States, we had 2.3 million Arab Muslims living in the United States. It took 19 hijackers, 19 radicals to bring America down to its knees, destroy the World Trade Center, attack the Pentagon, and kill almost 3,000 Americans that day.
The number is 19 hijackers. 2.3 million Arab Muslims were living in America that morning, and 19 men destroyed the World Trade Center. 19 men also hit the Pentagon and killed 3,000 people. Then comes the question that detonates the room. Where are the others speaking out? Notice what she did not do. She did not attack anybody's faith. She asked where the moderates are, given they supposedly outnumber the radicals. Listen to what this audience does with that.
And since you are the only Muslim representative, save the applause till the end. And since you're the only Muslim representative in here, you took the limelight instead of speaking about why our government, and I assume, are you an American? You're an American citizen. So as an American citizen, you sat in this room, and instead of standing up and saying a question or asking something about our 4 Americans that died and what our government is doing to correct the problem, you stood there to make a point about peaceful, moderate Muslims. I wish you brought 10 with you to question about how we can hold our government responsible. It is time we take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs.
That applause is the sound of a room that waited years for someone to say it out loud. Brigitte Gabriel stands up and finishes anyway. You had the microphone at a Benghazi panel. 4 Americans were dead, and you used it for public relations. Bring 10 people next time and ask how we hold this government accountable. Then the closer, throw political correctness in the garbage where it belongs. The questioner never answered a word of it, and that same collision is about to happen again on a very different stage.
Gabriel speaks out of 2 sides of her mouth. I mean, first of all, in one breath she'll say the West must support moderate Muslims and the moderate Muslims must speak up against terrorism. And in the same breath, she'll say peaceful Muslims are irrelevant. Miss Gabriel needs to make up her mind when it comes to what is radical Islam. When asked by Australian News, she said a radical Muslim is someone who prays 5 times a day, someone who believes in the word of the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book, someone who believes the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, is a perfect man. That's basically every Muslim. So I have no idea what she means. Where is the room for moderate
Watch how this thing opens. Sarsour doesn't lead with Boko Haram. She leads with an old Australian television interview. 2 sides of her mouth, she says. It's a character audit dressed up as a rebuttal. Gabriel's actual question is still sitting on the table. Where were the collective voices when those Nigerian schoolgirls were dragged off in the night? 276 of them. Sarsour's answer is next, and it goes almost everywhere except there.
Islam.
We need to support moderate Muslims, and we work with them. We actually have keynote speakers at our national conference who are moderate Muslims. I had a TV show where we invited them on to be on our TV show. We want to expose their message, but that's completely different than dealing with terrorism, what I deal with as a terrorism analyst. And that's what we need to discuss. The moderate Muslims, they can organize. Where are their collective voices? Where are the voices of the moderate Muslims speaking when girls kidnapped by Boko Haram disappear and we still do not know where they are?
There's the answer to the contradiction charge. Gabriel names her own national conference. She names the moderate Muslims who speak from that stage. She names the television show she put them on. That's not a slogan. That's a roster. Then she puts the question back. Where are the collective voices when a Nigerian dormitory is emptied overnight? Now listen to what comes back at her. It starts with organizations issuing statements and ends with the media's fault.
Quite a bit on Fox News. Where are the moderate Muslims? What's the answer to that question?
There are people out there that stood up on Boko Haram, on terrorism, on 9/11. There are national Muslim organizations who continue day in and day out to put out statements. Is the media covering it? I don't have control over the media to cover these stories. And I don't have to prove to anyone that I am an American born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and that my parents chose to come to the United States from living under military occupation in Palestine. And you talk about going into a grocery store in Arlington, Virginia, because you speak Arabic and you understand the culture and that's where you get your credibility from. I understand the culture and I speak the language too. And I've never, ever walked into a grocery store or into a hookah lounge or into a community center or a mosque in this country where people were saying that they wanted to
Count the moves in that answer. Statements exist, but the media won't cover them. Then a biography, Brooklyn, born and raised. Then Gabriel's credibility gets audited again, this time over a grocery store in Arlington, Virginia. And the closer is personal experience. I've never walked into a mosque where anyone wanted to destroy America. Nobody asked her about a mosque. The moderator asked where the collective voices are. Watch Gabriel answer that with something you can actually check.
destroy America.
We know what is being put out. There has been a study after study of the material that have been found in different mosques across the country, research after research, and these are factual research that have been presented to our government.
Do you do terrorism? Are you a terrorism analyst on terrorism in general? What about the Las Vegas shooting, the manifestos, the Oak Creek shooting where white supremacists walked into a Gurdwara and killed 6 people?
Terrorists are terrorists. Terrorists are terrorists.
Well,
Gabriel points at studies of material collected from mosques, research handed to the government. Sarsour's response isn't to dispute a single study. It's to change the subject to Las Vegas and to Oak Creek. And Oak Creek was a real atrocity, a white supremacist murdering 6 worshippers in a Sikh temple. It's also not an answer about the documents on the table. Watch Gabriel's reply to that. Terrorists are terrorists, she says. Then she gets to the point she came here to make.
I immigrated to the United States and I continued having the Middle East as my focus. And that's what I talk about. We are dealing, Linda, with a radical Islamic element that wants to wreak havoc on the United States. There are cars driving in New York right now, testing for biological or chemical agents in the air to make sure that nothing has been detonated 24 hours a day. In New York City, in Chicago, in major cities in the United States, trying to protect the country.
But will we not look back?
That is something we need to discuss.
Will we not look back at this era as a gross overreaction to a terrorist threat that is not there in the way you're describing it to be?
The terrorist threat has been there, Brian, for years. America has been attacked under different administrations since 1979 by radical Islamists, whether we had a Democrat or a Republican.
And by people who have twisted Christianity into their own beliefs as well.
I agree with you. I agree with you. There are extremists on both sides. But when you look at radical Islam, the country is safe all these years since September 11th because our great protectors and first responders and FBI have put programs in place to protect us, and they are watching over the country. That's why we are safe.
There's the moderator's real position said out loud. Isn't this era a gross overreaction to a threat that isn't there? Gabriel's answer is a calendar. America has been hit under Democrats and under Republicans since 1979. And notice what she does with the quiet years. The country has been safe since 9/11 because the FBI and the first responders built the programs. Safety produced by work is not proof the threat was imaginary. That distinction is the whole debate.
Linda, do you feel there are specific examples of times where the media has fanned the flames of misunderstanding about Islam?
Absolutely. I mean, let's look at the Boston bombing. The first front page story came out on the New York Post of 2 young Algerian boys with book bags, calling them the bagmen. Immediately when an incident happens in this country that includes someone who just happens to be of an Arab country of origin or Muslim, we immediately start talking about terrorism and domestic terrorism. And when we have the same cases, similar cases, shootings almost every week in this country where dozens of people are being killed at the hands of guns and lax gun control, I'm more worried about getting shot by a gun or by a shooter in the US than I am from a terrorist attack. the media oftentimes, including Fox News in particular, who actually does hit series on people like me for standing up and speaking my mind and practicing my American patriotism.
The question was about the media, and Sarsour has her example ready. The New York Post ran 2 teenagers on its front page and called them bag men. That was a fair hit. Then the answer slides somewhere else entirely. Lax gun control, weekly shootings. She's more worried about a gun than a terrorist attack. That's a different debate with a different opponent. Gabriel came here to talk about coordinated mass casualty plots. And next, Sarsour stops arguing the topic and starts arguing about who is allowed to speak on it.
The media does play a role in this, but it also gives, again, the platform to people who are pseudo-experts. And just because you grew up in the Middle East and just because you supposedly lived under a war doesn't make you a terrorism analyst. There are people who have extensive training in this area and at the same time can talk about very fringe Islamic terrorism without talking about Islam as a religion being a threat, the fastest growing religion in the country. And what Miss Gabriel and her friends don't say is that many of the foiled plots that in this country have been foiled by information that came directly from the community, in some cases even the immediate family members of those who were alleged to be organizing a terrorist attack or traveling to places like Pakistan and others.
We're talking about as
Listen to what she reaches for now. Pseudo-experts is what she calls them. Just because you grew up in the Middle East doesn't make you a terrorism analyst. That's not an argument against anything Gabriel said. It's an argument that Gabriel shouldn't be at the table. Gabriel lived through the war in Lebanon. Her strongest card comes at the end. Plots get foiled with information from Muslim families. That point deserves a real answer. Watch Gabriel give it one, with names and with dates.
to Americans about how we can protect our country. We are both faced with an enemy wishing both our destruction. When those people attacked the World Trade Center, they wanted to kill Americans, Muslims, Christians, and everybody. When Zazi or Shahzad wanted to blow up Times Square or the New York subway system, they were planning on killing Americans, teenagers, people taking the subways back to work or back home. They wanted to kill all of us. When you're talking about plots of mass scale, somebody parking a car about to explode in Times Square, or want to blow up the subway system in New York, or want to blow up the Sears Tower in Chicago. We're talking about the mass killing of thousands of Americans, if not millions. That is what we need to be discussing and how we can protect the country.
Isn't that...
That is how you answer a credential attack. Najibullah Zazi and the New York subway plot, Faisal Shahzad and the car bomb in Times Square, the Sears Tower conspiracy in Chicago. None of these are hypotheticals. They are federal cases with guilty pleas attached. And watch what the moderator does with that list. He is about to put one word on it. Keep those names in your head when he does. Gabriel didn't invent those plots. She just refused to pretend they weren't aimed at commuters.
Fear-mongering? To use the words like thousands and millions, isn't that fear-mongering?
The idea here is that you want to talk about terrorism, let's talk about terrorism and let's be prepared. But let's not prepare the American people that all terrorism that happens around the world comes from the Muslim community. That's the point that I want to debate with you here.
Well,
is that the idea here that terrorism is a serious issue, but terrorism does not equal Islam, it does not equal Muslims. I am from New York, I live in New York. I was here in New York on 9/11, Miss Gabriel. I understand the impact that 9/11 had on communities in New York City. I could have been in the World Trade Center. I could be dead here today. There were Muslim responders. There were Muslims. 75 Muslims died in 9/11, including a first responder, Salman Hamdani. So I want you to understand that if you want to combat terrorism, you need to work within the Muslim community. You need to make sure that we are part of that discussion. And the quote moderate Muslims that you're talking about, which are almost every Muslim living here in this country, need to be part of this discussion. But to alienate the Muslim community, create them as the other, and to start making over exaggerations about these potential attacks that haven't happened is not the way that you combat terrorism in any country, and especially not here in the United States, in a country where I can live here and speak freely, you can stand there and speak freely, and that's the kind of country that I want to live in, and I want to be part of the discourse.
So, there's the word, right on cue, fear-mongering, aimed at a woman listing plots that went to trial. And Sarsour's answer contains the line that gives the game away. over-exaggerations about attacks that haven't happened. Shahzad's car was smoking in Times Square. Zazi was caught with bomb-making instructions. Those plots failed because people stopped them. Failing is not the same as never happening. The rest of that answer is genuinely moving. Salman Hamdani, the first responders, the 75 Muslims killed on 9/11. Nobody on this stage disputes any of that.
And we want to make sure we protect this country. And we do work with a lot of moderate Muslims, like I said, who even come and speak at our national conference. What we're talking about now, Islamic terrorism. When you're watching the news this morning and you're hearing about terrorists in Syria, in Jordan, in Lebanon, at Boko Haram, in Sudan, in Nigeria, in Chad, in Libya, I can go down the list. Every single instant when you're watching the news, it's not Buddhist terrorists, it's not Christian terrorists. Yes, there are some crazy people who commit terrorism. But right now, the terrorism on mass scales, the bodies piled up, the people being beheaded, even Muslims shooting other Muslims, like what we watched in Iraq because they did not believe them that they were Sunnis. That is barbarism on a mass scale, and that's unacceptable in civilized.
Gabriel just answered the alienation charge in one sentence. Moderate Muslims speak at her own national conference. Then comes the roll call. Syria, Lebanon, Nigeria, Sudan, Chad, Libya. Turn on the morning news and count the Buddhist terror cells. She is careful about who the victims are, too. Muslims murdered by other Muslims in Iraq for being the wrong branch of the faith. That is the part her critics never quote back. Sarsao's closing ask is next, and it is smaller than you would expect.
Society.
As long as you clarify and you stand up and say that the fringe extremists of any faith are only a tiny minority in the larger faith, this is what we want you to talk about. When you talk about Islam and you talk about the Quran, the 1.4 billion people across the world follow the word of the Quran. You just got to make sure that you're being specific when you talk about terrorism of any faith, but more specifically.
Notice what just happened to the argument. 9 minutes ago, the charge was two-faced messaging. Now the ask is just, be specific. Say Islamic terrorism, but say fringe. 1.4 billion people follow the Quran, she says. That is not a rebuttal, it is a request for wording. Sarsour has moved from disqualifying Gabriel to negotiating her adjectives. And Gabriel gets the last serious word here. Watch how she closes it.
Terrorism.
They're not waiting to hear your opinion or my opinion. They want to kill us both. And this is why we must discuss how we can defeat the radicals who want to kill us, who are using the Quran as their source and justification for their murder.
Why are we having this discussion if you and I are irrelevant? Why the discourse? Why the debates? Why the analysis?
Exactly.
If we are irrelevant.
2 rooms, 2 challengers, 1 pattern. In the Benghazi panel, Saba Ahmed tried to make the question about representation, and Brigitte Gabriel answered with radicalization numbers and the history of Nazi Germany, Russia, and Japan. On television, Linda Sarsour opened by calling her two-faced and closed by asking her to choose gentler words, while Brian Stelter watched the goalposts move. Gabriel never changed her material, named plots, named attackers, mosque studies handed to the government. Her challengers changed the subject. She changed the room. Did she win these exchanges on the evidence, or did the crowd decide before anyone spoke? Tell us in the comments.